This past Sunday, we began our book study of Richard Rohr's Falling Upward, A Spirituality for the Two Halves of Life. Here's the basic premise of the book as described by Richard Rohr. There is much evidence on several levels that there are at least two major tasks to human life. The first task is to build a strong container or identity. The second is to find the contents that container was meant to hold. The first task we take for granted as the very purpose of life, which does not mean we do it well. The second task is more encountered than sought, and few arrive at it with much pre-planning, purpose, or passion. As we begin the season of Lent this coming Wednesday, it's my hope that we will use Rohr's image of a container to help us reflect on our life's journey so far. And I would encourage you to go to the church's website and download the discussion guide for week 1. And even if you haven't read the book, you can do the exercise in the discussion guide. It's a useful tool for reflecting on your spiritual life as well as life in general. So let's go back to Richard Rohr's image of a container. Rohr says that the task of the first half of life is to create a proper container for one's life and answer the essential questions. What makes me significant? How can I support myself? And who will go with me? In other words, we build our container from things like the family we're born into, the family we create, our education, the career we choose, the home we rent or buy, the community we live in, the activities we choose to do outside of work, and so on and so forth. All of these things help to form our identity, and they say a great deal about who we are and what we value in life. And our society is structured in a way that encourages us to build our container and make this a top priority in life. And this is good to a point, but not everyone gets beyond building their container. And if we spend all of our time on these activities, what do you think we end up with? An empty or half-full container, of course. Sure, our families, careers, and circle of friends fill our lives with meaning and purpose. But two people can do the same job and one of them is happy while the other one is miserable. Let me give you an example. While I was in college, I built my container by pursuing a degree in chemistry and math. I was good at these subjects in high school, so it seemed like the natural choice for me to pursue as a career. The problem with this, however, is that while I was good at it, I had no passion for it. When I was a graduate research assistant in the Department of Chemical Engineering at the University of Pittsburgh, which sounds more impressive than it actually is, I remember thinking to myself one day as I was working in the lab that if I did this for the rest of my life, I was going to lose my mind. In other words, I was building the wrong container. It didn't suit me. And I'm sure some of you probably did the same thing. You probably reached a point when you decided to make another career choice. And that choice for me was to go to seminary. And I chose this because while I was in college, I was very involved in my local church. I was a worship assistant, taught 7th grade Sunday school, and helped out with youth group. And I loved everything about what I did in church. It was my passion, my joy, my happy place. And so I began modifying my container in a way that better suited who I was. You follow me so far? And I share this story with you because there are points in our lives where our containers no longer suit us. And far too many people simply live with the choices they've made, whether they make them happy or not. And if you're at that point in your life right now, I totally get it because I've been there myself, but I decided to make a different choice. So maybe you need to use your time this Lent to reflect on the container you've constructed and see if you want to make any changes to it. And this is especially true as we have faced 2 years of pandemic together. Many of the things that help to build our containers have been dismantled. And the question we need to ask ourselves is, are we going to try and reconstruct it exactly the way it was before the pandemic? Or will we build something different that reflects the person we are now? I think it's essential that we all intentionally think about this question. As Lent begins and the Omicron variant subsides, it feels like the right time to do this. But reflecting on how we build our container is not our only task in life. Rohr says that there is a second one, finding the contents our container was meant to hold. I know for certain there are things our containers have held during 2 years of pandemic that we all want to get rid of. Our need to be oh so careful is one of them. Some of us have really wrestled with depression, anxiety, and grief over the things we've lost during this time. We've all had to deal with the negative effects of being isolated from others. Many of us long to get involved in activities that used to give us meaning and purpose, such as volunteering hands-on in person with organizations that help the poor and marginalized. So we all have some container cleaning to do at this point in the pandemic. And again, Lent seems like the right time to do this kind of spiritual and emotional work. But there is another component to this spring cleaning of our containers. We need to ask ourselves what we'd like to fill them with. Rohr says this is something few people do with much pre-planning, purpose, or passion. And the reason why we're reading this book is so we have a tool to help us do this work in an intentional way. In order to fill our containers, we need to ask ourselves, what spiritual and emotional qualities do we want to nurture in our lives? Do we need a deeper sense of peace, or joy, or love? After 2 years of isolation, what activities do we want to become involved in that are not just busy work, but give our lives meaning and purpose? During this pandemic, we've focused a lot on ourselves and our family circle. And now as we expand this circle, who do we want to include in it? And who do we want to exclude? These are just some of the questions we need to ask ourselves as we go about the holy work of intentionally filling our containers. And believe it or not, this brings us to the Transfiguration story in our gospel lesson. And I'd like to touch on it briefly because it reflects the two tasks that Richard Rohr says are important in life. With regard to the first task of building the container, the symbolism of this story is that Moses and Elijah are passing the torch on to Jesus. They are giving him their seal of approval. Jesus is the new Moses who will lead his people to a new promised land. He is also part of a long line of Jewish prophets that includes Elijah. And like the prophets of old, Jesus will speak on behalf of God, and he will tell us what we need to know about God and about ourselves. So in a sense, Moses and Elijah helped to form Jesus' container, his identity as the leader of God's people and a prophetic voice in their midst. And then in the Transfiguration story, the image of Jesus' face changing and his clothes becoming dazzling white symbolically speak of what's going on inside of him. And the change is so deep and so profound that it could literally be seen on his face. And this is the way I've always understood the language of the Transfiguration story. It's a good way of describing what happens to us as we intentionally go about filling our container. How we feel on the inside is always reflected in our faces. And this will most certainly be true when we can set our masks aside and see everyone's beautiful faces again. That'll be a great day. And my hope and prayer for this Lent is that we will take the time to intentionally work on the tasks I've outlined in this sermon. And then when we take our masks off, like Jesus, our faces will give off a holy glow of compassion, peace, and joy. We will shine brightly because we've taken the time to do the kind of emotional and spiritual work Christ calls us to do in order to be more like him. So blessings on your Lenten journey. Amen.